yield back the microphone because I'm way out of time. Thank you for your indulgence.
Chairman yields, and now I recognize Mr. McClintock for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I need to offer a word in response to the opening statement by the ranking member. He obsesses over a 1-degree increase in global temperatures over the next century, but he couldn't care less that the Democrats' policies are making it harder and harder for families to afford to heat their homes, purchase groceries, or drive their cars to work, or even have work to drive to. These policies are madness. And they're now having a terrible effect on the prices that Americans have to pay for everything from gasoline and electricity to automobiles and light bulbs. Europeans are already waking up to this lunacy, and I think Americans will soon follow. I also need to respond to Ms. Porter. I'd remind her that half the forests in California are privately owned. The private forests are healthy, resilient, and fire-resistant, because their owners manage their forests and match the timber density to the ability of the land to support it. And they make money doing that. We need to do the same thing. We used to. You know, a fourth of the funds from federal timber auctions used to go to local communities that were that were affected by the forest, and the other 75% went to the Forest Service to manage our forests. The environmental laws of the 1970s now require an average of 4.5 years of studies before we can undertake a forest thinning project. They cost millions of dollars, more than the value of the timber to be harvested. So private landowners keep their lands in excellent condition and they make money. Federal land managers have kept our forests in decrepit condition under these laws, and they lose money. That's not the fault of taxpayers for not paying enough taxes. That's the fault of the very policies that my friend from California has spent her career advocating. In fact, according to a recent UCLA study, the 2020 wildfires in California released twice as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as all of the CO2 reductions that they imposed in that state between 2003 and 2019 combined, and at a staggering cost to taxpayers and consumers and employees. Now, Mr. Sams, I have Yosemite National Park in my district, and I want to address management issues there that are a continuing nightmare for park visitors, and they've become an economic disaster for the gateway communities that depend on park visitation. Crowding exists in the valley, but the valley isn't the sole destination for visitors, yet the reservation system doesn't make this distinction, nor does it distinguish between peak visitation periods and slack periods. And far worse, it makes it impossible for spontaneous trips to the park by those in the general region. Now, in a memo to your management there at Yosemite, the gateway businesses noted the experience with the reservation's problem. And here's some of the things they noted. Uncertainty regarding access for those who want to visit Yosemite from out of state or internationally, and the existence of a ticketing system inhibiting visitation generally, ticket hoarding by locals, complexity, confusion, and frustration for visitors, unfairly advantaging large properties inside the park, a greater congestion at entry gates, and rigidity and inability to respond to real-time events based on actual demand pressure. These are what the locals have actually observed there. Now, I've written to you to ask that the Park Service not finalize the reservation system until other alternatives are explored. And as I wrote to you a month ago, rather than seeing what pressure points remain, the pilot system is overly onerous and restrictive to the public in several areas, which will mask opportunities to create a more appropriate, minimal, public-friendly, long-term solution. So what are you doing to take this into account?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And yes, this is a huge issue across the service as we see more and more folks wanting to come to their parks. And we're trying to work very hard and recognizing that, of course, what works at one park may not work at another. What you're doing at Yosemite is not working, and yet you don't seem to be taking that into account in plowing ahead. You know, I've got to tell you, candidly, that the gateway communities feel the current park management is entirely insulated and disinterested in their input and feedback. In fact, when I met with them a few months ago, the park management was invited to attend, but instead they blew us off. A few years ago, I took note of a sign in the conference room at Yosemite. It posed the question, is it good for the park?
Well, I suggested then, and I repeat today, that that's precisely the wrong question. The right question is it good for the park's visitors? And I'll tell you, my assessment is that this is an attitude problem that runs deep, deep in the Park Service. And if you can't correct it, we're going to need to find somebody who can. The best visitor experience that's been reported to me at Yosemite over the years that I've represented it came during the shutdown during the Trump administration. Now, during the Obama shutdown, the Park Service canceled all events, it ordered all businesses to be shuttered, it chained all the entrances, it even blocked turnouts overlooking the valley so people couldn't even stop to get a glimpse of the park from afar. Now, during the Trump shutdown, however, the park gates were kept open, concessionaires continued to operate, and except for a brief period when the concessionaire had to arrange for alternative trash collections, visitors reported that they had a much better, hassle-free experience without the Park Service being on duty. Now, what does it say about the park management when their absence leads to a better visitor experience than their presence?
Thank you for the question. Well, first and foremost is that we ended up having to do a lot of remediation because during that time period, and we're continuing to do that remediation. Last summer, I had the good chance of enjoying some of Yosemite and seeing how many folks come in and truly enjoy it. The balance under the Organic Act, of course, is how do we protect these cultural and natural resources while ensuring that it's open for the enjoyment of the American public. It is a very tough balancing act that we're looking at, and we want to work very closely with the gateway communities, with
Yes, but
your
you're
counties,
not.
and with you.
That is simple, empty rhetoric. I'm telling you that your management is not, and that's the experience of these gateway communities, and it's a growing frustration. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now turn to the representative from Oregon, Mr. Benz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to thank the witnesses for their presence today. Director Stone Manning, I have a bunch of questions, no surprise, given the size of my